Very excited about today's episode. I've got a very special guest on, Miss Ilda Andaluz, and she has over 20 years of experience within HR, but over 15 years in leadership, and is in the top HR position in her current company. It's a very fast-growing company. It's actually one of the top 5 FQHCs in the United States and the top in the Southeast United States. And they're rapidly growing, building. And so I want to get her expertise on this. She doesn't have just experience in healthcare. She has actually a wide variety of experience across industries. And we're going to actually talk about how that's actually been an asset. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Ilda.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, I really want to lean into this topic too about, the fact that changing industries can be an asset, because a lot of times we can get kind of pigeonholed into whatever industry that we're in. And I'd love to hear from your standpoint, how it's been helpful in your career and some innovative things that you're able to do because of that varied experience. So I want to, first of all, let me get your overall thoughts about changing industries.
Well, a lot of people have criticized me throughout my career for changing so many industries. And what I have to say about it is that I did it on purpose. I've worked now, this will be my 7th industry. I started in telecommunications, and I've worked in, telecom, manufacturing, retail, municipal, education, recently oil and gas, and now in healthcare. And the reason I did it is I was always trying to understand two major things. One is HR the same everywhere? And what is good leadership look like? And come to find out that regardless of any industry that you're in, you'll have the same people problems. Usually it stems from miscommunication and leadership. People being promoted into roles and they've never had leadership training before. Communication coming, top down, bottom up, whatever it is, there's always miscommunication going on. And those are the major things that I'm finding in every industry that I've been, that they've asked me to fix. How can we fix this leadership problem, this gap? How can we have better communication? And regardless of what industry you're in, there are solutions to it. It just comes about of like, what solutions do you want? What is the root cause of those problems? Some of it could be, generational, where the company's been very old and they've just done things the same way and they don't like change and they're like, it's not broken, don't fix it. Or people are completely, very new, and you're having a lot of different new leaders coming on board and they have all their own ideas, but they're not coming together as a team. And so there's miscommunication, misalignment there. And then there's the basic one that I just said, where people get promoted into roles and they don't have any training for it. They've been good at their roles, subject matter expert of their roles, but they've had no necessarily training on how to lead people. There's this misunderstanding or misconception that managing and leading is the same thing, when it's not. So those have been the things that I've found out. And then the other piece of why I've changed a lot of different industries is I was chasing myself. What does good leadership look like? I was chasing for a good leader for myself. And I've always wanted to be a good leader myself. And that's why I was chasing through that. Like, what do I need to do to be a good leader for others? I wanted to be that leader that I wish I had. And I've been lucky enough to have really good leaders, very great mentors, as well as terrible ones as well too. So I've learned of what not to do.
Oh, I love this. Okay, I have so many things to break out of this. So one of them is, what does good leadership look like? When you were observing it as the person who's not the leader yet, you're looking up to leadership, or maybe you're in leadership but you're looking to go to that next level. What did it look like for you?
For me, it meant someone that didn't have all the answers, but would surround themselves by people who did, would surround themselves by people who were expert in particular areas that you did not have. So if I had a background in project management and my leader didn't, well, I can bring that tool to my leader and help my leader, with particular projects. Or if I was good, at presenting and putting PowerPoints together and grabbing big ideas and summarizing them, then I could help my leader with that. So that's what I saw good leadership in good bosses that I've had, was they would come to me and be like, they would see my strengths and they would utilize my strengths. And that's what I've tried to do everywhere that I've gone, is look at my team overall and look at what are their strengths and how can I build their strengths even more, and how can that complement with my areas those are not my strengths.
Oh, I like that. Okay, now, you mentioned project management, and I think you mentioned something about presentation as well. Give me an example of how that really worked in your favor, that you were able to kind of bring this to the table and kind of how that worked out.
Yeah, that actually project management was actually something at the beginning of my career where um, this is straight out of early 2000s when I started my career, and my leader at the time back then said to me, "You need to learn project management. You're gonna be working on this big project." At the time, I had to put together a national recruitment program for new grads, and I had never done that before. But one, he saw that I could do it, and two, he believed in me. And then he said, learn this. And one of the things that I said to him is like, I want to learn new things. So I took the challenge, learned project management, actually got a certification in project management, and come to find out that everything that we do in HR is project based. So I put that project together, and it was my first time having to put a project plan together, understanding how it interlinks with activities, but also like setting timelines and budget, and understanding that those are things that are important to senior executives. So when they're saying yes or no to budgets, you need to be able to answer those questions to them. And since then, I've used that in every role that I've had, and I make sure that my team understands the basics of project management, and I lead that way as well too.
This is such a key, and I think it's really missing in a lot of cases when
Mm,
I interact with those in HR, because HR are very much people persons, right? Who
mhm,
like people.
mhm,
Um, However, when it comes to getting down to the brass tacks of projects and how this particular project that we're trying to get funding for will affect the company's bottom
mhm,
line either way, that's where I see a little bit of a weakness, if you will, or I don't see
mhm,
that as dominant. And
mhm,
so, you being an HR leader, I'm seeing you as an outlier. So,
mhm.
explain to me, if you don't mind, what do you think helped you to actually think and process information that way?
Yeah,
Because I think
yeah.
it's actually exceptional.
So I think I had, another great leader that pushed me to get my MBA and pushed me to get business acumen courses even before I got my MBA, to push for me to understand how our business runs and how our decisions made. And what he taught me was like, regardless of what industry you're in, or if you were for profit or nonprofit, he's like, leaders will always look at the bottom line, will always look at the business perspective of it. You need to be able to speak in those languages. It's like, you don't have to be a business person, but you need to at least understand it. Because I'm a very curious person and love to learn, again, I took the challenge and I'm like, okay, I'm getting my MBA. That's great. Like if this is what is needed, I'm going to do that. And I got support from my leaders to get my MBA, and I pushed through it to understand. It was hard. It wasn't easy because that was not the way that my background is psychology. That's not how my brain would think. But I forced myself to um, to think in that way. On top of that, I would read a lot of business books. I would devour them. I had a boss that would challenge me to read at least a book a month on business and to start thinking in that way, so that your brain gets trained in that way to start thinking in that way. It's not very common in HR that you see folks that have a business mindset, or have that training background on business. That has definitely helped me to lead teams, have definitely helped me to grow in my career as well too. And now when I do present to the board or to executives, I can speak that language. I'm not afraid to speaking that language.
I like that. Okay, so if you were going to suggest to someone who's watching, they're an up and coming HR leader, an aspiring leader, and they want to do better in this area, what book would you suggest they read?
There's so many books out there. One, I would say take a project management course for sure.
Okay.
Two, I would say instead of reading a book, maybe take a course, on just basic finances, understanding
Ah,
finances, how to read finance, understand your own finances in your business. So if you work in an organization, are you looking at the finances, the revenue, how money is made, what are the margins, what is all that? Do people are afraid of that jargon? So learn that, either to grab a book on that or take a course on that to understand it. One of the things that I did is I shadowed a finance person, and I told them, like, I don't understand this, like help me understand this. And that's what I would do. I would take the finances and look at it. In fact, it's helped me that every time I've applied to a new role, I look at their finances first, and I was able to ask questions through my interview. I'm like, how are your finances doing? Am I walking into a problem or not? uh, because it was important to me. So
yeah.
that's what I would say. There's not one particular book, but be curious about that part. I mean, when you're interviewing yourself, asking those questions pushes a different level, and you stand out from other candidates because HR folks don't tend to ask that question.
You're 100% on. I mean, that's awesome advice there. Okay, and then going back to, we're talking about the idea of changing industries. Um, what was your thought process in terms of choosing an industry that you
Mhm,
wanted to kind of move to? What
mhm,
advice would you give there?
yeah. Because I started in telecommunications, one is I came from an industry that was very big, and this was back in Canada when I was in Canada. It was very big and it was national. So I was fortunate to be able to move up in a big organization where HR was huge. We had like over 300 people in HR. So there were a lot of different positions and you could grow in that way, but also the scale and the resources were big. So I learned a lot from that perspective. But then I was curious, like, not all organizations function this way. Not all organizations have this large number of HR folks. What is it like when you work for a smaller organization, medium size, or even small? And that was my attraction to start looking at, well, what could this look like? And then I fell into retail. And what was interesting in that for me was this time I was responsible for a number of locations, so multi site. And I had never done that before. I was always very site driven or in one location. And this time I had like about 20 or 26 sites, I think, at the time. Leading it that way and focusing on problems of the way were different because what I've learned was that every site had a subculture. And most folks in HR were responsible. They put the responsibility on us, to fix the culture. This is a whole other layer of culture for me, which is like, wow, every site has its own subculture.
Yes.
How do you fix that or focus on that? And then every site had their own leadership problems as well too. And it was interesting, especially when we were looking at how do we promote folks or move folks from one site to another site. And then you're putting, they were used to a particular way of leading in one site because maybe that location, had was a certain amount of size, and now they were going to a bigger site, and it was a different challenge for that person. Were they ready for that leadership in that? So that was very new to me, and I had to learn on how to figure that out. And so, yeah, so I would always look at the industries from that perspective, like what's the business problem? So never from an HR problem, but more like from a business perspective. And that's how I started to change and look at different things.
This is a very interesting thing you just brought up, and it's so true about subcultures. Lou Adler, who I've done some work with and read his books, he
Mhm.
mentioned something in one of the interviews I had with him is that a person's view of the culture is largely based on their manager and their department, not
Mhm.
necessarily the whole company.
Mhm.
So it just kind of um, confirms for me what you just said about how there's so many different subcultures, and that's a major consideration when it comes to the culture of the overall organization. So that's a great point.
You're absolutely right, and I think HR folks or leaders tend to forget that culture is everybody's responsibility. It's not HR's responsibility to fix it, and there's nothing to fix, really. It's more to get an awareness and understanding of why there are these subcultures, and for executives to understand that they put the tone of the organization of what the culture is going to look like, how they behave as executives, what are the nonverbals that they have, how they themselves treat each other and their own departments. Is there collaboration between departments or not, or between those two executives? These two executives don't get along. Guess what? Their departments are going to know that those executives don't get along, and then those departments are not going to work well together because they're following their leader. That's creating a culture in itself. And that's what executives tend to forget, and senior leaders tend to forget, that all eyes are on them. They set the tone of the organization. They set the tone of the culture, not just the folks at the bottom. It's everyone.
Wow, that's another key point. I've actually seen that happen where you
Hmm.
have two
Hmm.
executives who don't care for each other for whatever reason, and therefore their entire departments do not play well together. That
Yeah.
is such a great point.
Yeah.
Wow.
Hmm.
Any advice you want to give on how you start to approach that problem? I know she said nonverbals. I'd love you to kind of explain some of that too. There's some nuance there I want to hear.
Well, the nonverbals for me are like when you have meetings and just people are, just by their body language, you can tell, what they're not saying, um, or, not showing up to meetings itself says something about how important that is for them as well, too, or not accepting the meeting. Some people, you send them a meeting and then they don't accept it or decline it. So you're just wondering, are they coming or not? That says something
Hmm.
about it as well, too. So the nonverbals that define your culture as well too.
You mentioned how the multi-site. I wanted to also talk about how that's affected your thought process with moving into healthcare that also has multi-site, and kind of how that prior experience has helped you
Mhm,
in this
mhm.
case.
One of the things that has helped me in moving to different industries is I've been able to grab my learnings from different industries and be able to use it to solve problems depending on where I am. Now I've moved, from oil and gas to healthcare, very, very different. And I've been in oil and gas for about 11 years now. And this is my first time in healthcare ever, never done this before. And coming to legacy, one of the things that has surprised me the most is how many locations we have. We've got about 50 clinics, around Houston. And again, they're asking me to look at culture and leadership and how do we solve the problem of that? How do we transform it? Not a problem. How do we transform it so that we can move forward as an organization and keep growing? And one of the things that I like to say is we should always be leading forward. If we want a company to grow, we've got to lead forward. But to lead forward, you've got to honor the past and find out where you came from so that you can explain that change to folks. And in this organization, because we've got so many different sites, finding out that, well, there are all these subcultures within these different sites. Taking my background from retail, I'm taking that experience and being like, oh, okay, I've seen this before, different industries. The way that we solve it was looking at what are the different cultures of every location that we had in retail, going in and solving the problem per location versus putting a blanket statement for everybody and then getting people, not to agree to it, or being upset about it or saying that doesn't work for us because we're different in this location. So I'm right now I'm figuring that out where I am. I've only been here 2.5 months, and looking at, could that be a solution here at Legacy where we're looking at leadership development from location clinics to clinic, but also having maybe a different layer where we can do it, company wide as well too. So kind of looking at a combo is what I'm playing around with the idea.
I like it. And in your past, did you also look at, when you're looking at these different locations, you're kind of looking for like a benchmark or like a
Mhm.
ones that have done really well that you want to kind of replicate across the company, or are you just allowing each of those locations to kind of express their own individuality and that sort of thing? What's your take on that?
Well, I like to create what I call early adopters. So looking at first which clinics would be interested in, doing something differently. So I want to throw it out there for them and see if, any clinics raises their hand and be like, we'd be interested, and then start with them, and then for them, then create demand, from other clinics and be like, oh, we want to do what that clinic did. It was really successful, or that didn't work at this clinic, and let's do it differently in another clinic. So kind of like a learning and a continuous improvement mentality. um, I'm a huge fan of Six Sigma, and my manufacturing background helped me with that because I've worked in manufacturing as well too. So looking at continuous improvement, not just a one and done and be like, oh, that didn't work and that's it. It's like, okay, well, what could you do to progress and change it and fix it? So continuously learning, continuously fixing it. That I think is very important, especially in this type of environment.
Yes, I agree. Okay, now you talked earlier about awareness. So, what are some tools that you've used in the past that helped you to create more awareness about either those subcultures or the transformation? But what are some things that you have used and it's worked well for you?
Mhm. Personally, what has worked well for me and in changing the cultures, one is creating awareness for people themselves to be aware of who they are first. So I've done a lot in the past, disc assessments or personality assessments. So really holding that mirror in front of folks and be like, do you understand how you show up at work? Do you
Mm,
understand how you communicate with others? I think we all, as humans, think we do understand until that assessment that puts it in words for you to read about yourself, and you're like, oh my god, this is exactly me. I didn't know I came across this way, or maybe you just didn't want to see it, that's how you came across. Then teaching people there's no wrong or bad personalities. It's just like, well, how do you work with that? How do you work with your strength and your weakness and build from there? And that creates a cultural change as well too. So for instance, if I'm a very dominant person, do I realize that I come across dominant in all my communication, regardless if it's positive or negative? And that could have a negative effect when you're in a room with people who are not dominant, right? So they might decide, might be creating fear, instilling fear in people, and that's creating a culture in itself where maybe that's not your intent. Do you know that about yourself, right? So that I think is the basis of a lot of cultural change and just change in itself.
yeah, that's a great point. And I was just thinking about how when I've been in those rooms, those dominant personalities, it stifles any type of feedback or
Hmm.
any type of pushback or anything because they don't
Hmm.
want to
Yeah.
displease the leader.
Yeah, yeah. I've been in situations where some leaders did not know they came across that way. In particular, I support a lot. A lot of my career has been in supporting women in their growth, and looking at, some females have stronger personalities, and they've had stronger personalities because they felt that they needed to be that way in their room. There's usually full of men, but they didn't realize that then it stifles somebody else, another woman, from giving them feedback or talking to them, or they come across as too aggressive or not caring enough. And
Mm,
that might not be, they might not realize that they're coming that way, or that might not be their intent, but that's their impact. So teaching people that your intent and your impact is understanding both is really important as well too. You might have really great intent, but the impact that you've left behind can destroy people's confidence, or the culture and so forth. So it's teaching folks about that, not to change, but to be aware, to be self-aware. Because I don't want to change people of who they truly are, their core, but maybe just be more self-aware.
I love it. Now, when you help them become more self-aware, the next step is the next step perhaps letting other team members that they're working with know what those things are, or just is it something we're keeping private? How do you
No,
handle that?
yeah, it's a very good question. It's not to give private. A part of creating change and cultural change is to be vulnerable and to be open about it, right? To talk to people about it, so that um, you can have a more transparent culture, a culture of creating that feedback, like you just explained, right? That's how it starts, and then you start building the most fundamental thing, which is trust. You start building trust within each other, right? My leader trusts me enough to tell me what their shortcomings are. Then my leader trusts me enough to share this information with me. Coming here into this new role, I've had to quickly tell my team, what I'm good and not good at, what they should expect from me and not to expect from me, as well as just setting expectations, of what I expect from them. And from the get-go, building that, and I'm changing the culture of my department here to be like, okay, I won't tolerate people being late for meetings, for example, right? Like for me, punctuality is very important. Let's make sure we start meetings on time, or explaining to them, my strength, is more on project management. As I just explained, my strength is not on understanding all the lingos and everything in healthcare. I'm going to need your help for that. And being quite open with them and honest about it from the get go has set a tone already of like, okay, she's a new leader, she's coming in, but she's not that scary. you know, because
Right.
people are afraid when the new leader comes on board. They're afraid of the change. They're afraid of what this means to them, and also, and just building that relationship. I think one of the things that people forget when we talk about culture and transforming culture, it's also about building relationships within an organization. Just because you've been in an organization for 10 plus years or whatever amount of time, I mean, it doesn't mean you've built good relationships with folks. What has been your personal brand within your organization? How do you show up? What do people think about you? If you say you're going to do something, do you actually do it? So all of those little nuances are things that you need to be self-aware, and that's how you start building and changing that culture.
It's interesting you use that term personal brand within the company. I never thought of it. Whenever I think of personal branding, I'm thinking, okay, how I'm putting myself out on LinkedIn. But you're right. A
Mm-hmm.
person does have a personal brand within the corporation.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, anytime that somebody names my name, I want them to know, like, yes, we can trust her. Yes, we can count on her. That's important for me internally, how people view me, not just my boss. Yes, it's important how my boss views me, but what about everybody else? Because I need to work with them. I need to collaborate them. And if they're not inviting me to the meetings or calling me up to get my input on things, then how are we working together? How are we transforming this culture together?
Yeah. One of the things I noticed, if I may, is in my first in-person meeting with you, for example, I noticed something that was interesting about your leadership style. And I'm assuming this is how you do things, is that you came to the meeting with specific things that you had in mind, a vision. But before you got to that, you asked several questions and let the folks in the meeting bring their points out. And then after they brought them out and you asked a couple of follow-up questions, then you went into your part of the vision and what you had in mind.
Mhm.
I thought that was interesting. Was that intentional, or tell me about that?
That's usually how I lead. Yes, I'm very curious to understand that what other people think first, and it's that typical, seek to understand first, right? So I've always been that way, but I think I've learned it from good leaders who have done that way as well too. So one of the things that I've I've learned here in healthcare, being a short term, it's like see one, do one, teach one is what they say here a lot in healthcare. And so I'm like, I'm translating that to like, okay, seek to understand first, right?
Ah,
Um,
yes.
so looking at that first is always seeking to understand what other people think, and other people can have better ideas than I do. So why not ask the question first? And if it also gives you insight on like, are we aligned or not aligned? And if we're not aligned, how can I ask the question, to go deeper and to understand them better? It goes back to collaborating. I want to be able to work together. We're in the same company for a reason. Let's work better together. So seek to understand first. Ask the questions, and not questioning. There's a difference. I've had that conversation recently with someone saying there's a difference in the way that you ask the question. All right, do you come across as questioning, or do you come across as curious and asking to understand? So it's yeah, that's been new for me to talk about with someone here, and it's been an eye opener for some.
That is awesome. I love that questioning. Because sometimes it can feel like it's an interrogation more so
Hmm.
than it is fact finding, right? Or just
Yes.
being curious. So,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and a person responds differently. Their responses, the way they express themselves, is differently
Hmm.
depending on how they feel that you're coming across.
Yeah, that curiosity piece is very important. Coming across as someone that's curious has always been, I would say, one of my strengths. It's not coming across as like I know it all, because I know I don't. I just impossible. I'm a very curious person, and I like to ask a lot of questions. I've had to learn on how to ask questions so that they don't come across like I'm attacking or interrogating, like you just said, because people will not want to speak to you again, right? Or not want to collaborate with you again or share information. And a lot of people have great information in organizations. You just have to pull it out of them.
Love it. Okay, so Ilda, I have a would you rather question for you. I actually have two would you rather questions for you.
Okay,
Are you ready?
sure.
Okay. The first one is, would you rather spend a day transforming HR strategies
Hmm.
or resolving current HR challenges?
Oh, the first,
Okay.
transforming HR strategy. Yes,
Why
yes.
is that?
Because the latter, if you're just fixing the day to day, you can never move forward. Whereas I'm more of a vision person. I can see what the potential is, where we could go. So I'd rather do a strategy and look at what it could be, um, and then bring people together to help me solve that problem. I love bringing people together and getting other folks and other people's ideas.
I love that. Okay, yeah, and that's kind of my brain works too.
Yeah.
Now, if you were to take a guess though,
Hmm.
amongst all the HR leaders that you've been around and been exposed to, where does the focus tend to be?
Mm. It tends to be the day to day. It tends to be in the day to day. I think people put their heads down and just focus on what they are responsible for, and just and stick there, because it's scary to look up. It's scary to try something new, but if it fails, right? Or it's scary to get other people to buy into your vision and to what you're thinking of. It's not a safe space to be, and there's not. I haven't seen. I shouldn't say there's not. I haven't seen a lot of HR leaders that are innovative or think outside of the box. HR tends to be very black and white, very process driven, very policy procedure driven. And I'm not like that. People don't like it when I say, I don't really believe in policies and procedures. I think it's more like guidelines. I'm not going to be the police. I'm not going to be looking at, whether or not you have the right dress code or not. I really don't care about that piece. I want to know, like, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are you going to do to support this organization to make it better? How can we work together as a group to make this the best place to be for our employees, the best experience? So I don't play around in the black and white. I'm very gray, and it some people don't like it. I've rubbed some people the wrong way because of it, but I think that's how you become innovative and look at things differently.
Wow, that's yeah, I agree. Now, okay, now let's say I'm used to the day to day. That's just what I'm involved in. I've always got my
Mhm,
head down. I'm taking these day to day issues, but I want to change. I actually want to transform, but I feel
mhm,
like I don't have time. What can you give me like one tip or two tips of what I could
mhm.
do to perhaps start to make that change
Yeah.
towards transformation?
I think putting down those ideas, what those ideas are, to create change, to write them down, and to speak to your leader or different leaders outside of your function to see, would those ideas work? Like, what do they think? And start building that and building your internal relationships as well too. And hopefully you have a leader that listens to that, and that your leader can share with you some of the other strategies that are coming that may be linked to that, or maybe even raising your hand to work in a different project outside of your day to day. You putting yourself out there and working in interesting projects, and not necessarily in HR. It can be projects outside of your function, just to learn more and to open your eyes more, your experience more, and just to gain more experience.
Love that. Okay, now I have a fun would you rather question.
Okay.
Okay, would you rather be able to speak to any animal and converse with them where they understand you, you understand them, or would you rather have the ability to speak any human language?
The ability to speak any human language.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So why is that?
One, I'm biased because I speak 4 languages.
Yes.
And I've seen the advantage of it. Personally, I've seen the advantage of speaking different languages and being able to relate to people. It's incredible to see how people's change and eyes change when you start speaking in their native language. So for instance, I speak French. So when I've, been dealing with France, on projects or issues that I've had to solve, even though we were an English organization, if I said to them that, are you comfortable with me switching to French? They would hesitate at first, but then they'd see that I speak French fluently like they do, and they would just give me more information and just be so comfortable, and felt that trust started to build in quickly because you're speaking the same language, right? So I've seen how great it is when people can speak to you in their native language.
That's amazing. So English, French, what are the other 2?
Spanish and Italian.
Wow, that's
Mm-hmm.
awesome. I love that. Okay. Yeah. Now see, I knew you spoke French. And I thought you probably spoke Spanish, but I did not know about Italian.
Yeah,
so that's a new one on me.
Yeah, rusty on my Italian right now because I haven't practiced this in a while. But as soon as last time I went to Italy, I was able to just speak it fluently. Yeah.
Nice. How long? Okay, so give me, if you don't mind, because people are like, wow, 4 languages, that's amazing. How did you learn those languages?
Oh, well, I'm not unique in any way. Where I'm born and raised in Montreal, Quebec, in Canada, which is the eastern side of Canada. And it's very typical for children from immigrant parents who are born there, where their parents did not go to school or French and English, to go to school mainly in French, to preserve the French culture and the French language in Quebec. So I had to go to school in French. But at home, my parents spoke Spanish, so I spoke Spanish at home. My neighborhood was English, and of course, Canada has 2 official languages, English and French. So you just learn English in school. And my father actually picked up Italian when he first moved to Canada because his boss was Italian. And before my father learned French or English, he picked up Italian first so he can communicate with his boss. And so I had Italian friends, lived in Italian neighborhoods. It was just around me. My best friend's Italian. And when I went to university, I decided to do a minor in Italian. And my parents were very, very strict when it came to school. So I went to weekends to school in English to learn and write in English on weekends. I went to school in Spanish in the evenings as well too, 2 times a week. So I've always had schooling in those languages to perfect it, because my parents wanted me not just to be able to speak it, but to read and write and communicate perfectly in all of them.
That's awesome. I've been around so many people here in Houston who have been in a situation where they could have learned that second language. Maybe they're in a Spanish household or Spanish speaking household, or a Vietnamese speaking household, or a Chinese speaking household, and they just learned English. They didn't actually learn that. Maybe they can understand, but they couldn't speak it or write it. And so I love that you took advantage of that.
Yeah, and then I isolated my children as well too. So my husband's Colombian, and my 2 children, they only speak in Spanish to my husband, and I only speak to them in English. And I've taught them a little bit of French as well too. So in fact, both of my kids took French in high school so that they can continue with that, because it was very important for us, And both of my kids now have realized how important it is to at least be bilingual, especially here in the U.S., where you speak English great, but if you can speak Spanish, you'll get that job before someone else, because you're able to speak the other language and communicate and read and write it as well.
Absolutely. And I'm going to also piggyback on what you said earlier about making people feel more comfortable, because even though I'm not fluent in any other language, I have learned simple greetings And that right there has even opened up them to be more
Absolutely.
interested, you know,
Yeah,
and more comfortable in speaking
yeah,
with me. So I've seen that
absolutely.
advantage as well.
Yeah, yeah. And then just also just to realize that at the end, we're all humans, right? Everybody just wants you want to share that you care for each other. I mean, the cleaning lady here, like I said to her hello, and she said nobody says hi to me because they think I don't speak, any other language other than Spanish. She said, but I do. And I said to her, well, I'm saying hi to you, right? So it's just interesting to see that as well too. We ignore people if we are afraid to talk to them or think they don't speak our language.
Good point. If there was one piece of advice that you would like to give to yourself when you're just coming out of school, you're just coming
Mhm.
out of graduating from either high school or college, what advice would you give to yourself? Because a lot of folks who are in that situation now, they just graduated recently, they're probably going through this process. So I think your advice to yourself would be helpful. Tell us what that advice would be.
Coming out of university, I think the advice I would have given myself back then would have been not to be afraid to speak up and not to be afraid to share my ideas. I was always a soft-spoken person and felt that people wouldn't listen to me because I didn't have that much work experience or what I have to say was not important. So I took a lot of step backs because of it. I didn't have that self-confidence of speaking up or was afraid that I would come across as too aggressive or overconfident if I did. Um, and that's would be the advice that I would have given myself is not to be afraid to do that.
Awesome. Now, as you said, university, I do have one additional question. For someone who's graduated from high school and they're trying to figure out if school is for them, maybe they're whether they have an interest in school or not, continuing it. What are some considerations you would suggest they would consider, and whether they're going to pursue their education further
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
in the university, or perhaps trying some type of apprenticeship or some other
Yeah.
program?
I would say that university is not for everybody. It doesn't need to be, and that's okay. What I suggest for people to do is to pick something that they're really passionate about, that they really like, and to focus on that and getting good at that. To be so great at that passion that people can't overlook you. To be like, wow, that person is really good at X. And be really good at it. Hone into it. Learn about it. Make that your passion times 10 so that people see that you are an expert in that area and keep growing in that or diversifying in it, whatever that is. But you don't have to go to university to be successful, be great. Just focus on one thing, be really good at it, and put your energy in it and learn as much as you can on that and make sure that people understand that you're an expert in that. Make sure that people have to notice you because you're good at that.
Ooh, I love that. Listen, Ilda, I really appreciate our conversation today. There's lots of nuggets I got out of this, and I can't wait to share it with the folks who are going to be watching. So let me ask you this. What's a good way, if someone had follow-up questions, what's a good way for them to contact you?
Well, thank you. It's been great being on your show. And if anybody has any questions or want to follow up with me, they can also reach me on LinkedIn.
Very good. Well, thanks again for being on. We look forward to having you back.
Great. Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.